when you think about it, that resistance and that conflict is all about fear. It's because I'm afraid what I value is going to get lost if we give attention to what you want and what you value and your point of view, right? When we see it as a polarity, then we can see, wait a minute, we both have things to bring, both are essential, both are necessary, and if we serve both and take actions to make sure we're getting the best of both, then the patient is going to have a better outcome.
All right, welcome to Medical Entrepreneur. We have some special guests today. We have MissingLogic on. And so without further ado, I'd like to have each of them introduce themselves and then talk about kind of the MissingLogic company and their own journey to medical entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Adam. And we are really excited to be here. I think this is our first podcast on an entrepreneurial focus. So we are excited to be here. So my name is Michelle Troseth. I started out as a critical care nurse and then really focused my practice on professional practice and did a lot of work on evidence-based practice and shared governance and interprofessional collaboration. And that's actually how Tracy and I first met. We both love interprofessional collaborative practice. And then our work, we had a mentor, and that she was a nurse, and then that work took us really all over North America of helping other organizations create healthy work cultures and sort of taking what we were learning in the field and applying it to other organizations. And then from there, we became very involved with the electronic health record because we actually, Tracy and I were on a team that built the first interdisciplinary was the word back in the day, clinical documentation. So we designed that, and then we were purchased by a technology company, and we continued bringing the strong clinical voice to that. And then that led to us being purchased by another company. So we have held roles like in corporate and also working with customers. And then eventually we decided in 2017 that we were ready to leave our corporate roles and that we had much more to give to healthcare. And we had this entrepreneurial spirit in us that had been growing over about a decade of time. And that's when we took the leap to MissingLogic. So I'll let Tracy introduce herself and tell you the rest of the story.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Christopherson, and I'm a respiratory therapist by profession and received my doctoral dissertation on interprofessional collaborative practice. And so as Michelle mentioned, we have a long history. We have been colleagues and friends for over 30 years, and we met at hospital orientation. So they did we're in this huge auditorium, and they did the stand up and shake the hand of the person behind you. And that was me. And we like to say we've been shaking hands ever since. And we worked together as clinicians at the point of care and critical care. And then as leaders in the organization, as Michelle mentioned, we were leading this large, healthy work culture initiative, which started in our own organization and then grew across North America. So I spent a lot of my career working with leaders and clinicians at the point of care, helping them to create these healthy work cultures, and then also interprofessional collaborative practice environments. And when you work with organizations like that, clinicians and leaders over a long period of time, we did this for like 20 years, you really begin to see the patterns of the challenges that they face over and over and over, right? And everybody thinks they're unique, but they're not. The challenges are pretty much the same. They have different faces on them. They might look and feel a little bit different, but they're at the core, they're the same. And what we recognized was that they looked at these challenges as problems to solve. And what we knew from our experience and the work that we had done is that not every challenge is a problem that can be solved. Many of them are polarities or these interdependent dynamics that need to be leveraged. And so when we decided to leave corporate and we took a step back and said, what is the contribution we can make now? How can we serve healthcare? We knew there was a lot of resources and energy and time being wasted on these problems that can't be solved. And so we knew we wanted to bring something around polarity, having a polarity mindset to these leaders because it's the missing logic in their leadership skill kit, right? So that's why we named our company Missing Logic. We kind of started on that journey and really kind of putting together some frameworks and approaches to that. We developed Polarity Intelligence, which we'll talk more about. And then COVID hit. So then it was like, okay, now what do we do? Because, this is kind of a unique situation in healthcare. Pretty much everybody's focused on one thing and one thing only. And what we saw was there was so much support for the clinicians at the point of care, and rightfully so. And we were right there banging the pots with them, right? Like just really cheering everybody on and doing what we, really offering that support. But what we saw is that there were so many leaders. They weren't even mentioned. There wasn't anybody giving attention to the leaders. And we knew behind every clinician was a leader trying to hold them up, trying to lift them up and do everything they could to support them. And so we turned our attention to leaders, and then that kind of set the trajectory for some of the rest of our work. So I'll pause there. That's probably enough for right now.
First of all, that explains the Missing Logic. So always curious how that name kind of fit in there. And so that's amazing. And then when did you guys meet, or how did you cross paths? How did you decide to, I want to work with you?
Well, like Tracy said, the first step was hospital orientation when we shook hands. The next step was working in critical care together and really having this shared purpose of wanting to improve our practice environment. And then we were very involved with council infrastructure. So we were both leaders in that work. So we became very innovative as interprofessional colleagues. We did interprofessional rounds in ICU before people were even writing about it. We had interprofessional councils that we were growing, where we were beginning to develop a lot of interprofessional processes. And we were joined at the hip, and we really took that role seriously. And then we expanded, as Tracy said, beyond that. But in the process, we became very good friends. Now, when you're presenting together and traveling together and doing the next, collaborative project together, you get to know each other a little bit. And then we introduced our husbands, and they got to know each other a little bit. And pretty soon we were just, okay, let's just keep this work moving forward. And while we were part of a bigger group, we also were very focused on, what we were learning and applying it to our own lives, and also, how to just bring what was most important to us out into the world along the way. So it has been a journey, and it has evolved over time.
Yeah, we also did legacy planning.
Yes.
So I think one of the things that, Michelle and I did together that was separate from what we were doing in the corporate world was to really think about our partnership, the contributions we were making, how we wanted that to continue, on. And so that foundation of really thinking into the future, 3 and 5 years into the future, I think kind of set us up. So when we were ready to leave the corporate world, we knew we already kind of had a foundation of how we wanted to work together. So I think that was a big part.
Wow, that's a really good point. Like, not too many people take the time to ever do legacy planning. But I mean, obviously it works really well in your case. Would you say for people that are for example, partners that are just getting together, would you recommend that they do legacy planning to kind of set the course? Or?
Oh, definitely.
Well, anybody that's in a partnership really has to have a strong relationship and a strong foundation. And so you have to know that you have that common purpose, that shared purpose of where you're headed and what it is you're trying to achieve, because you're each going to bring different skills and different talents and different strengths to that partnership, and really understanding what that is, what you're bringing, who you are together and who you are individually, and how that is going to pave the path and move you forward it's all a part of that kind of legacy planning and knowing where you're headed.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we actually observe a lot of entrepreneurs burning themselves out, even those that have partnerships, because that foundational piece isn't there. And it might start out really great, but how when the going gets tough or the bumps in the roads come, that foundation is so important. And we actually have built that into our frameworks and into Polarity Intelligence, because that relationship piece is so important. And the polarities are tensions that exist. They're always there, whether you deal with them or not. And just like they're in healthcare, they're in our businesses too. They're in our marriages. They're in our friendships. They're everywhere. And Tracy and I understood that at a deep level, and we really kind of built that into our processes and how we run our business and how we still stay really good friends while we're leading this company as well.
Wow, I think you have a really good point there, because like a lot of times I'll find that, especially with entrepreneurs, they'll typically kind of fall into several different categories. And typically you have like maybe somebody who's a visionary, and then, like several of the entrepreneur books will say, hey, this person's a visionary, this person's an implementer, and then they try to find these kind of partnerships. Could you kind of go further into like the polarity intelligence? Like, how did you first, is there something that you saw in the corporate world that's like, oh, hey, I can see this is polarity and that's what's causing these tensions? And how did you come across to come up with the idea? And if you could tell us more.
Yeah, sure. Well, in the work we were doing in the field all those years, we were like everyone else, where we were trying to fix the problems in healthcare. And we kind of did that whole thing. We're going to move from this way to doing it this way. And what we noticed is there was a lot of resistance. There was just so much resistance in that work. We're going to go from traditional healthcare to innovation healthcare. And there's resistance in that, right? And then along the way, we met Dr. Barry Johnson, who was really, we call him the godfather of polarity management. And we partnered with him. We learned a lot from him. And the more we worked with him, the more we understood that polarities are everywhere and that they needed to be applied. And Tracy and I didn't see anyone applying it to healthcare. So that was one thing we knew that we could really help people understand it, what polarities are, and then actually give them tools to assess polarities and to and really have sustainable outcomes, because that's another major issue in healthcare. We don't have sustainable outcomes. I'll let Tracy tell you a little bit more about just what polarities are and how we help leaders understand pretty quickly how they work.
Polarities are interdependent pairs of values or points of view, perspectives. They appear to be opposite or contradictory to each other, but they actually need each other over time to get you to that greater purpose that both serve. Okay, so a really easy example that any health professional would understand is inhaling and exhaling. Right? We have to inhale to receive oxygen and exhale to remove carbon dioxide. But we have to have both to sustain life, right? If we don't, the deeper fear or the biggest risk we have is that we'll die, right? So all polarities work the same way. So there's benefits to both poles, and each of the interdependent pairs are called a pole. So there's benefits to both. And you want to leverage both in order to keep moving yourself towards that greater purpose. And you want to avoid the negative consequence of over-focusing on one pole to the neglect of the other, right? So if we over-focus on inhaling, the carbon dioxide is going to build up, right? If we over-focus on exhaling, we're not going to get the oxygen that we need. So there's always a consequence to over-focusing. And it's learning to leverage this energy and tension that sits between these poles. Now, as an entrepreneur, right, and in healthcare, a major polarity is mission and margin, right? We have to make money, right? But we are serving people too at the same time, right? We get into the field because of our mission, but we have to have margin, right? Individual and team is another one when it comes to interprofessional care, right? Working and bringing your gifts as an individual, but leveraging the strengths of the team. So, there's a methodology to that. And what we learned is that people are using an either or mindset. Thus the resistance, right? Because it's either my perspective or your perspective. And what we're teaching with polarities is that it's both and. In many instances, it's not an either or. You have to have both. And you just need to be able to differentiate between a problem and a polarity. And that's the polarity mindset component of polarity intelligence, is to first be able to differentiate when you have a polarity and it needs to be leveraged versus a problem that can be solved, okay? The other, and what we bring in with polarity intelligence and where we've taken it a little bit in a different trajectory than Barry Johnson, is adding healthy relationships and meaningful dialogue to the components of polarity mindset. And that's because we have to have that foundational relationship to sit in conversations with people who have opposing perspectives, And to know that we're moving towards a shared purpose and have meaningful conversations to uncover where resistance is, uncover what our perspective is, see the both and in the polarity itself. So that's just a little bit more about kind of polarities and polarity intelligence.
I think you nailed it on that one, because I see, like, now that you explain that, I can see that everywhere in every institution I've ever worked in. It's just like you said, the mission and the margin,
Yep.
and these kind of things. It's like, and you could see, especially even between different teams, etc.
Yes.
Could you give an example of like how once a team that you consult with like gets the polarity intelligence, how do you leverage a polarity which would normally you might be divisive?
Well, we work with teams in healthcare organizations, and we also work with leaders, in our coaching programs as well. But if we were going to work with a team in an organization, we just listen to their story. What are you struggling? What's working well for you? What are you struggling with? What are you most excited about? And because we're so trained in polarities, we can pretty much identify this is a core polarity that you're dealing with, and we affirm that with them. So, for example, one group of leaders we were working with, they identified candor and diplomacy was a polarity that they were not managing well. They needed help with communication. Structured and flexibility, that was another one. When you're a management team, you have to be able to leverage and take action on both of those poles. So those were a couple of several that we worked with them on. But then what's the magic about it is they come out with what their shared purposes together as a team. They come up with what the positive outcomes look like from their perspective when they're doing both well. They understand the negative consequences if they're not managing it well. And then we help them come up with action steps. Like, what are the things you need to do to be candid together as a team? What are the things you need to do to be more diplomatic together as a team in your communication? And then they also identify when they're getting off track. So, we're starting to, be too focused on diplomacy again. We got to bring it back to candor. And then they measure the results. That's the exciting part about it. They actually measure where they sit as a team, and then we can remeasure, weeks later, months later, and they can see how well they're maintaining that outcome.
Well, I was just going to say what Michelle's describing is there's actually a mapping process. So you can actually put the polarity, the positive outcomes, negative consequences, action steps, and early warning signs in a map. So it makes it very concrete and very clear. If we do these action steps, we should get these outcomes. If we don't, here's what's going to happen. And here's what it looks like early on when that's starting to happen, right? So it makes it takes something that is invisible, this tension that they experience, and it makes it very visible and very concrete. And then the map can be turned into an assessment tool that they can then assess themselves over time and how well they're leveraging it.
I was going to say, even the metrics you're talking about tracking. I mean, I can only imagine. Like, first off, I see the huge value in your consultation, because I can just tell you from working. I'm thinking right now, like when I used to work in Ryder Trauma Center, and so we had all these different teams. We had the anesthesiology team, we had the surgical team, we had the nurses, we had the managers. We had, like, there's all these different. We had the respiratory therapists, and all of them had their own kind of viewpoint. And, as you would describe, like a polarity, and the inefficiencies that came from just this kind of conflict. Like, the environment was basically a conflict-based environment for anybody who entered,
Mm-hmm.
And so I could see, if you could align that even just a little bit, how those efficiencies would really not only make the workplace much more attractive for people to stay, but also just really increase, patient satisfaction, increase, provider satisfaction, and probably increase revenue too.
Yeah. Well, and really, when you think about it, that resistance and that conflict is all about fear. It's because I'm afraid what I value is going to get lost if we give attention to what you want and what you value and your point of view, right? I'm afraid I'm going to end up in the downside of that because we're going to shift all of our attention over to what you want. What I want is going to get lost, or what I value is going to get lost. And that's the either or thinking. It's either my point of view or your point of view, and we're going to make a decision. We're going to do one or the other, right? We're going to care for the patient in this way or this way. And what we have to when we see it as a polarity, then we can see, wait a minute, we both have things to bring, both are essential, both are necessary. And if we serve both and take actions to make sure we're getting the best of both, then the patient is going to, right, have a better outcome. So it's helping people to not feel like they have to hang on so tight to their perspective and point of view or what they value because they're afraid of losing it. They recognize when it's a polarity, oh, I'm not going to lose this. We're going to give attention to both. What I value is going to continue, right? What I bring is going to continue to be valued. So I think that's where it helps teams get to, is understanding, oh, I don't have to hang on so tight and be so resistant. I can open up a little bit because I'm understanding this differently.
That makes total sense. It all comes from fear and scarcity, you know? So,
It does. It does. That's the bottom line, right?
Is there an example of maybe how you might have used the polarity, thinking, the polarity training that you offer? It's kind of like, redo a dysfunctional team, one that you want, if you can say.
Well, we have been called in to work with groups that are struggling, and actually we had one chief nurse executive said, of all the people that I think can help me, it's the two of you. And let me tell you, I've been working with this group of managers for a long time. And it seems like no matter what we do, no matter what consultant we bring in, I find myself in the same place a year later. I think, oh, they're coming, they're getting it, they're making progress. And so she brought us in, and we actually taught them dialogue skills, the principles of healthy relationships. We taught them about polarity, having a polarity mindset. We helped them identify the key challenges or the polarities they were dealing with. And it was transformational. We actually started out with a full day retreat with them. Actually, it was day and a half, wasn't it, Tracy? It was a couple days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did a couple days. Mm-hmm.
And they'd never been together that way. They had never stepped aside and learned those skills together. And they had a bond that happened that weekend that was amazing. And they have continued to thrive. And we continue to work with them. We're going to be working with them again.
Yeah. And so we measured their, we had them do an assessment of where they were at, and they created their own action strategies.
Yeah.
And they identified some of these, points of view, right, that were conflicting, where they were conflicting with each other. And they leveraged dialogue and relationships to kind of see each other's perspective, move a little bit beyond that. And then we measured it a year later, and they had improved in every single area. So they just continued to leverage what we taught them throughout the year, and continue to get better and better at leveraging. And there were 4 really key polarities that were under the surface that they didn't know about, didn't understand, that were, pulling them back and really making it difficult for them to work together, right, to achieve the purposes that they wanted to achieve.
Well, and one thing you brought up was just about like kind of dialogue and communication. One of the things that, we've heard a lot about is that sometimes the younger generations, because they have been, maybe raised more in technology, more of an isolated environment. Many people are saying like the next generation that's coming up, even to the point where they actually prefer to be anonymous when they work. They don't actually like to have, direct communication. Could you maybe speak to like how your training, or even, any kind of training with dialogue, and being able to maybe even teach people like what might be considered basic communication skills in the past? Like now there's some people that can't communicate at all,
Well, yeah. Well, dialogue is not, I always like to say it's not communication 101 that we learned in med school, nursing school, respiratory school. It's much different. It's really, it's a way of learning together. It's appreciating, wow, I can learn from this young person that I've never grew up as a digital native. I've had to learn my own way through this stuff. But you know what? They have a wisdom I don't have. And that is the beauty of dialogue. There's an assumption that everyone has a wisdom that I don't have. And it's really about creating the space for that. And the first principle of meaningful dialogue is, intention, and creating intention and psychological safety. And that's so important that people feel safe to say whatever they want to say, to describe their discomfort, whatever it might be. And then so much of it is listening, just really listening, being aware what's happening to what's happening in the room, what's happening in the conversation. And it's being safe to ask questions. It's this whole it's just really uncovering what is really there and creating that space for that. And I think people make a lot of assumptions that gets in the way of that learning and understanding. And when you, when you really can create that understanding with anybody, that you will make progress that will deepen the relationship. Tracy, I don't know what else you want to add to that.
I think the whole polarization of our world and our environments has had a major impact on young people too, right? On all of us.
Yeah.
And we're just all running around hanging on, right? And instead of creating environments, and I think you have to have that environment, to Michelle's point. You have to create a safe environment for people to feel like they can even speak. And what we teach people isn't like, it's not a formula, it's principles. It's basic principles of how to connect with another human being in conversation, to really listen, to create a space where anybody could feel comfortable talking with you, even if it's one-on-one. It's not even a group. It's just the, two people.
Right.
It's really that just kind of inviting space in silence and being okay with when there's a pause, because that's where the beauty is. That's where people are reflecting. They're being thoughtful about what they want to say. We are just so busy talking to each other and talking over each other and saying what we got to say and thinking about what we want to say when somebody else is talking. And we're like, just right. And dialogue is about, let's just slow it down, folks, right? Like just calm down. Let's just relax. Let's just really be with each other, really hear each other. Respect what's being said. Know there's wisdom in it. Give people an opportunity to advocate for what they believe. It's okay if somebody believes something different than what you believe. Yeah. And just creating that space. And so there are basic principles that you can use in your marriage, with your kids, in your community, in your work, wherever. And that's, we don't go with a formula or a script, say this, use this, right? Because that doesn't help you really, right? It's really about understanding. There's some basic principles about being in meaningful conversation.
What's really interesting is I think all of your stuff has come from like real world environment. Yeah. And, just as somebody who's been in some of the larger organizations, for hospitals, like it seems like every year there was a new push. It was, was it getting to great or something like, and then it was, who moved my cheese? Then it was, it was one of these, like, there's always some new thing, right? And then there was one, I think, where they're having fish from the Pikes Peak market or something, there's always some kind of thing. And like, what I love about your stuff is like, is exactly, from real world, like from the ground up. It's like, not like some ivory tower thought, like,
and that,
I could see how,
and that was really important to us. It's practical. It's practical wisdom. It's absolutely universal. Polarities are everywhere. It's how we are showing up and how we're being in our work environment so that we can take meaningful action. Yeah. So I really appreciate you calling that out, Adam. That is our intention. Yeah.
Well, I think you guys have something amazing here. And, we've only talked about the polarity, but you also have the healthy, the H2O framework, the Healthy Healing Organization. Could you maybe speak to that?
So when we turned to the leaders, we developed the dynamic balance effect framework. And that was just Tracy and I taking everything we'd learned about personal growth and transformation and putting it in a framework to help leaders with burnout. And we also had this experience of working with healthcare organization and having lived what it's like when you are working in a thriving, healthy work environment. So we developed the Healthy Healing Organization, or H2O framework, as well. And that also has 3 pillars. And the first one is people, right? It all comes back again to those relationships and the people. People are what make an organization. It's not the brick and mortar. It's the people and the culture inside. So really supporting them through these concepts and teaching them polarity intelligence. But then there's also processes and really looking at, the different structures and infrastructures and the things that need to, could be better. Maybe they're not designed correctly. Do you have the infrastructures to bring the people, together as well? So that's the other pillar. So we got people, processes, and the other one is performance, because Tracy and I are very committed to outcomes. So we don't ever want to just go in and do what we call an executive exercise or talk about something and leave. It's really looking at what are the from a polarity perspective, what are the chronic tensions in healthcare organizations? And they're common ones. It's not like rocket science. Again, it's common sense. It's the mission and the margin. It's the individual and team. It's the practice and technology. There's several of them that we already know exist in every organization. So we work with organizations to measure them so that they can improve and they can also experience sustainable outcomes over time.
I think that's pretty amazing. Is there anything that you would say to like maybe a smaller organization? So what if you have like a small clinic of, 8 to 10 people, something like this?
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting that you asked that, because I think there's always some baseline polarities, right? That are it doesn't matter what environment you're in. But when we started our business, when we looked at, you want to have your purpose and your values, and polarities are core values. So we identified what are the core values in our business that are polarities that we need to leverage, right? To have a strong performing business and to support our team, right? So of course, mission and margin is at the foundation of a lot of that, right? But also productivity and relationships. We've got individual and team, kind of candor and diplomacy. So we have to be able to, have those communications with each other, process and progress. And so those are kind of some core for a small environment, a small team, right, that wants to move an organization forward, a business forward. Those are some. And then the other one is work and home. Because when you're, you always want to have the balance between your professional life and your personal life. And everybody has to deal with that. And when we are all leveraging that polarity well, then we're coming into our work environment healthy. We're supporting each other, right, to maintain that dynamic balance between those things. And I think that's the other thing that I don't think we've mentioned yet, but this is all about dynamic balance. Life is not 50-50. We're not talking 50% here and 50% here. There are times where, just as we all experienced in COVID, right, we were all pulled heavily to the professional side, right, of our lives, right, to serve patients, to help individuals with this terrible, virus. And that, like, everything shifted that way. And so what we know is that will happen occasionally, right? And sometimes we can get pulled to the personal side. We've got somebody in our family who's ill, right? Or we're ill and we're being pulled that way to give our attention to that part of our lives. So what we have to do is take simultaneous actions and try to maintain the positive outcomes on that other pole, right? So especially with work and home or professional life, personal life, it's really about, just never let go, never stop taking action. You might not be able to take as much action or as many actions as you typically do, but do the thing that will get you the most positive outcome in that area of your life. If it's your personal life, do what you can, right? With your rest or activity or whatever it might be, right? Connections to your family, your relationships, whatever's going to lift you up and keep you strong in that area, that's your priority while you're giving a lot of your attention to the other pole. So those are just some core ones, and kind of how we teach people. It's not, all of these are dynamic. They're always shifting, right? And you just want to keep moving up to that greater purpose and leveraging both as you go forward as a company and as individuals.
And then if you don't mind me to take a different track, like how about your own personal journeys into entrepreneurship? Because you're helping so many people, kind of build their organizations and that kind of thing. Could you talk more about like, when did you decide to kind of like pull the trigger and say, hey, we're going to go out and do this kind of on our own? Like maybe you were, I think you were describing before, you were kind of like in the corporate world and you said, hey, look, I think we can maybe do it better. We can help more people. Could you maybe describe that journey and how that came about?
Well, we, like Tracy mentioned earlier, we were doing legacy planning, and we didn't really quite have it all figured out yet. But every year we would up our plan, right? Up our plan. But what happened in the process is we were growing individually as people, and the corporation we were working with, with changes, because there's always going to be change. What we noticed is it was getting further and further away from our core values. And it was kind of like you started feeling lost in everything that was happening. And I became the president of the National Academy of Practice in 2017, and I knew I was going to have major stuff in front of me. And Tracy was entering her doctoral program, and we knew that was important to us as a company and as partners because of the outcomes. And we just knew, like, when it finally got there, we'd been doing so much planning. It's like, now's the time. Let's do it now. Let's take the leap now. And that was in 2017.
Wow.
And then we just stepped back.
That's amazing.
We just stepped back, Adam, and said, okay, we've got 20 plus years of experience.
Yeah.
And, we know what our strengths are and we know what we don't want. And what we had done for years is we were on the road every week, right? We left on Monday. We came home on Friday, maybe worked the weekend, right, to get ready for the next week. We traveled, and we love to travel, but but you're spending more time on the road than you are with your family, there's something wrong, right? And I used to say frequent flyer miles are great and status is great, but all it says is you're never home. I mean, that's all it says, right? So we knew that we didn't want to do that all the time. Like, we wanted to travel, but we wanted to choose when we did that. We wanted to work more remotely. And so that's kind of the thinking that went into the design of how we would work with people. Like, what's our biggest gift? And we thought Polarity Intelligence is what we want to bring, because this is something that's a major gap for every leader and it's impacting every aspect of their life. And then how do we want to work? How do we want to deliver these services? And how do we want to show up? And so those were the things that kind of, helped us to determine what kind of space we wanted to work in and how we wanted to go forward. And here we are.
I think it's amazing. Story with all your accomplishments, because you're really adding like huge amounts of value, especially into these organizations that, people that don't follow your framework. Essentially, it's kind of like, oh, well, let's just see what happens. Put all these people in a room and see what happens.
That's so true. And what we say is in our, in the work that we do with polarities, it's a crystal ball.
It is.
Because exactly what is going to happen if you don't maintain both those poles, and they feed each other, right? So if you're ignoring this, there's this whole energy field that's working on you as a person, on your organization, on your teams that you are not aware of. It's like gravity, right? You can't see gravity, but it's holding you in place, right? And these polarities are working and they are at work. They never, ever go away. And it's 100% predictable what's going to happen if you don't leverage them. And so, we always say, hey, if you want to be able to tell your own future, you got to learn polarities, because you can certainly tell what's going to happen when you do or don't take the actions that, you want to take.
Wow, and I could even see how the Polarity Intelligence tool you guys developed is very useful even for kind of management structure, because if you're a high level manager and you're like, hey, there's something wrong with this team, like there's all this conflict, I'm not sure what's going on. Yeah. Normally you'd have to send somebody, into the team, like, okay, Jill's angry about this, John doesn't like that, try to, negotiate it out or whatever. Now you could use your tool to actually identify, like, hey, here's the forces and this one needs to balance.
Yeah, that's, Adam, what we like to say too is it's a gift. It is a gift. It helps make sense of things you could never make sense of before. And it helps you tap the people. It's not having someone else to come in and fix them. They're very engaged in the process. It makes all the difference.
Well, and it gives and I think what I heard too, Adam, and what you said that I want to just draw out, because I think this is important, is it gives them a common language.
Yeah.
When you and your team understand polarities, and we just had this happen. Somebody that was in one of our, we did a keynote presentation a little while back last year, and we were having a conversation saying, oh my God, now that we all know polarities, we'll go, that's not a problem. That's a polarity, right? And then, so they, even just from being at a conference with us, they picked it up, right? And they can tell. And now they have this common understanding of what the tension they're experiencing and why they're experiencing it, and that it's not a problem. Wait, we can't solve this. We got to work on this. We got to understand it better. We got to know what it is, identify it and name it, and then begin to work it right together. And so it gives them that common language and understanding, takes it to a whole nother level.
And I think you guys have a very powerful process tool there.
Thanks.
I can see it. I could definitely see the value
Thanks.
for sure. Well, if someone's interested in kind of finding out more about your organization, is there certain like criteria you have for people to work with you, or like, how would they come about? I guess, if I'm like, hey, I have a healthcare team, I could see the value of this. Like, what steps do they need to take in order to reach out to you? Or
the best way is our website, MissingLogic.com. And there's a place on there that says contact us. So we have people contacting us through there. Then Tracy and I reach out to them. We also are on LinkedIn. We have Missing Logic LinkedIn company page. And Tracy and I even show up every Friday now doing leadership chats. So they can follow us there and reach out to us via LinkedIn. And then we're on other social media platforms as well. But probably our website is the best place to do an initial reach out.
Well, I appreciate you guys coming on the podcast, and you've taught us so much in such a short period of time. And I think you guys have an amazing process.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure to be here.